Hey my friends, Jeff here again. Hope you're doing well. Little different episode of WoW Classic exploration and behind the scenes type of stuff today. I'm going to share a cool story from early WoW development and how it sort of shaped the entire game. So I think just about every WoW player remembers the grand reveal of VanCleef's ship at the end of Deadmines in the big cavern. And you might have heard the original plan for this was to have the ship be outside off the coast of southern Westfall, maybe looking something like this. And for me, one of the most interesting aspects of WoW is how dungeon areas or instances are meant to be viewed from the outside world while you're out questing like normal, but like looking toward where the dungeon would be, and how that might be different than the inverse, which is how the outside world might be viewed while you're inside the instance dungeon, and there happens to be like a window or an outside area that gives you a view of the outside world, right? The main continents. And most dungeons are completely separate. Like the Wailing Caverns, for example, is supposed to be deep inside this big mountain that you can see when you're out questing in the Barrens. And of course, when you're inside the dungeon, you're completely cut off from the main world, and all you see are the tunnels of the instance, or the caverns, right? But there are a few exceptions to this rule, like SFK, Shadowfang Keep is the best one, where there is a really good level of continuity between the dungeon area that you see from outside as you're questing around Silverpine Forest, right? You can look up from Pyrewood Village here and see the dungeon area. And then once you're zoned in and clearing through the dungeon, there's this cool outside area up on this rampart pathway where you can look back down and see Pyrewood Village again. But again, that's like the exception. The most common practice was to have the dungeon totally cut off from the outside world. And just to illustrate this quickly through a bunch of dungeons, BFD, for example, is all interior. The Stockades, of course, is all in its hallways. Nomergon is all inside. Alderman is the same thing. Maradon, even though there's some epic views of the sky, you never see any of the actual surrounding areas. Sunken Temple is all inside. Everything's inside Blackrock Mountain, of course. Skolamance, Stratholme. All of these are completely cut off and have no view of the normal outside world areas. And it turns out that a lot of the philosophy for how this worked was shaped by the development of the Deadmines, because of course they ended up moving the juggernaut, the big ship, over here, back down around southern Westfall or northern STV, behind this big door, from a story perspective at least, supposedly inside the big cave or the Ironclad Cove as it's called in-game. And I wanted to share how the original approach to this came about when this issue or this problem very first occurred to the developers in like 2002. So this is John Stotts, one of the first 3D dungeon designers on the WoW team. And this is a little section from his amazing book, The World of Warcraft Diary, a Journal of Computer Game Development. And he wrote this book based on detailed notes he had kept while they made the game. And if you at all care about WoW, I promise it's one of the most interesting stories ever. And so this is a little section from that book. The Deadmines especially were focus of debate. Chris Metzen's story of the dungeon called for the grand reveal of an ogre juggernaut moored offshore, yet no one could figure out how to pull this off. If players in Westfall saw the juggernaut, it would seem strange that there would be no explanation as to why the warship was there. Yet if they saw nothing, it would break continuity between the world and the instance. If players killed the boss and jumped in the water, they would expect to be able to swim to shore, which could never happen because the dungeon server and the Westfall server were connected only by a teleport location at the entrance. After days of discussion, Dana, that's Dana Jan, one of the main early dungeon designers also, Dana severed the dungeon from the outside world by putting the ship inside a giant cavern, the Goonies solution, which prompted changes to the engine because interior spaces weren't supposed to be that big. Scott Harden grudgingly extended the engine's far clip setting, which controls how far the player can see before geometry disappears, to accommodate this special case. He warned the producers, if we push back the far clip, it means that the level designers are just going to keep building bigger and bigger rooms. And John goes on to say, of course, that's exactly what we did. And I won't keep reading it word for word, but later in the book, he talks about how this fundamental change to the engine and the far clip settings shaped the philosophy around the interior spaces. And that's what allowed individual rooms to be much bigger and led to them adding giant enclosed spaces like Onyxia's Lair and Ragnaros Chamber and these places where we have these giant epic encounters. So I just love how this decision related to the Deadmines is what shaped such a fundamental aspect of how the game works with these large cavernous spaces. And it also explains how, at least in Classic, the vast majority of dungeons are very separate from like the main game world of the Eastern Kingdoms or Kalimdor. And of course, in later expansions, there was much more immersion between the dungeons and the real world, kind of like they had done with SFK. A great example was the first dungeon of TBC, right? While questing around Hellfire Peninsula, you could look right up and see sections of the ramparts, and while inside the dungeon, you could look down and see huge sections of the landscape. Anyway, that's our look at how the original plan for the end of Deadmines shaped the way dungeons worked early in WoW. I do have to again point out I pull these maps and models from the WoW Tools and WoW Export program by Marlamin Kruithne. And like I said before, if you like WoW and WoW history, the WoW Diary Journal of Computer Game Development is just an amazing read. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.